How about we pray? Dear Lord, thank you that you can maintain and uphold under all the expectations and the desires that our heart has. I pray that today we'll see once again the depth of our idolatry and our sin, that our idols will fail us, but that you won't if we put our trust and hope in you. I pray for mercy and for grace, that we can see the things that make our hearts sin, but we can also see the way forward and learn to commit to you in faith and trust. Amen. The way we're going to do this, guys, we've still got 2 to go. So we've been looking at Tim Keller's deep idols. The deep idols being the things that underlie our shallow idols. The idea being that you can have money as an idol, but it may be for completely different fundamental motivational drives. So you may... Yeah? Yeah, it's here, it's fine. That's all right. So, for example, you may idolize money because it gives you control over your surroundings. So if you have enough money, then nothing can go wrong. Right? If you break your leg, you've got money. If somebody has a heart attack or dies, or there's some sort of financial situation like you lose your job, you've got money. So therefore, you've got control. On the flip side, it may be for approval. You may have a lot of rich friends. When I went to uni at UNSW, I met a lot of people from the North Shore, and they came from money. Never really had the desire to impress them with money, so I kind of dodged that bullet. But that's a serious concern for some people. For others, what are the other ones? We've got approval, comfort. Comfort's an obvious one. I want an Xbox. Money will get me an Xbox, therefore I'll idolize money so I can have the standard of living that I want. So today what we're doing is we're going to look at control. We're going to break and do discussion groups, and then we're going to move into power, at which point we're all going to go off by ourselves and have a bit of a quiet time of reflection and prayer. So far we've looked at comfort and approval. The interesting thing about control and power is that where comfort and approval look outward, control and power look inward. So where before, if for your comfort and your approval, you'll place your expectations for fulfillment and satisfaction on things and on other people, now you're actually placing those expectations upon yourself. The thing that we've learnt, at least from the last 2 talks, is that our idols will fail us, and usually catastrophically, and that'll lead us to great senses of hopelessness and despair. But what that means, though, is that if we have idols of control and power, those expectations that are placed on a finite human being, namely yourself, will crush you. So some of the hallmarks of these idols that we're going to be looking at is this idea that you'll feel quite worthless, and you'll be kind of plagued with anxiety and plagued with fear. To give you some context, though, we need to understand where this need for control and this need for power comes from, because they govern our lives and everyone has them. And so what we need to do is we need to step back right to the beginning, to Genesis 3, where we learn that we've sinned against God. Now, we all know that. We've all kind of been in the Christian game long enough to understand that Adam and Eve sinned on behalf of the human race, and then as their loyal children, we did the same thing. But what happened was this, essentially. When God created the world, he created it with a certain order. The order being that God was the king, the creator. He controlled everything. He had power over everything. And he made us to rule over the world and have control over the world in his stead. But we were still made as creatures, which meant that we were finite, that we had limits, that we weren't God, essentially. When we sinned, though, we supposed upon his office. And what I mean by that is we said we want to be God instead. We want that control and that power, and we want it indefinitely and infinitely, just like our God does. We want to control our own fates and our own destinies. Problem, though, with that is when we took a step out, we moved from creature to creator, but because we're creatures, we didn't ever hit the final mark. So we got left somewhere in the middle, an area which I call no man's land. Now, the problem with that is, at least in the scheme of creation, you're either the creator or you're a creation, and we've kind of jumped into the middle somewhere, and all of a sudden we've lost a lot of our identity. So where before, as creatures, we had confidence in God, and we knew his power, we knew his control, we didn't have that anxiety and that fear and that stress. But as soon as we actually jumped out into no man's land, now we know that's a phrase from war, you're pretty much dead. You can get shot. There's safety in trenches on either side, but once you're in the middle, you're gone. And in that particular case, we jumped out, trying to exert control over our own lives, trying to exert and power over our own lives. And we found that we couldn't do it. We were found wanting. So the essential upshot of sin and rebellion is that we were left alone and naked with this deep, deep sense of incompetence. where before we said, we can do this, we can make a goal of it, we can make it happen, we've stepped out and we've suddenly realised that I don't actually have the goods. I don't have what it takes to live my life in a way that I want to live it. Now, this is particularly important for males, because this is going to strike at the heart of who you are. Because in a male's identity, the identity is, if I can do this, I'm a man. Right? If I can chop down a tree, I'm a man. If I can set up a fire, I'm a man. If I can successfully navigate a marriage, I'm a man. If I can build this, if I can fix this, I'm a man. So control is very integral to a man's identity, which means it's going to be very integral to your identity too. The response then for us is that when we step out and we realise that we don't have control, we try to create a mini world as such where we do have control. And so that's what I really want to be looking at today, in the sense that we will choose something and we'll make that the thing that we're good at, and we'll make that the thing that we have, I suppose, I don't want to keep using the word, but we have control over. So a flimsy example is gardening, right? You have control over everything that happens in there. You can plant where you want to plant, you can cultivate where you want to cultivate. Bonsai, you can make the tree branches go different places. That control is going to extend into a whole variety of different places. It may be at home that there are certain ways to clean the house. It sounds stupid, but that's just how things roll. And so what we do is, rather than kind of looking at the big picture of the world in general and how out of control our lives actually are, we'll take a small segment and we'll try to make that our own, and we'll try to control it in every possible way to give us that sense that we are actually in control of our lives, that we can actually make it, that deep anxiety and fear is displaced and put off to the side where we don't have to think about it. The reality, though, with idols is that they will eventually fail us, and that deep sense of anxiety and fear comes crawling back and will sit in the back of your mind and keep talking to you. So today's statement, at least for this talk, is I'll only be satisfied in life and with myself if I can control this particular part of my life. The word I want to focus in on is actually plans at this point. So I'll read from you Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. So when we think of control, we need to think about plans and aspirations and goals and choices, because when we exert control over something, we're exerting an intention that we want to see come to fruition, if I can put it that way. Right? So when we make a plan and we see that plan come off, we're actually controlling our lives. Does that make sense, the logic there? So Proverbs 19:21, the first part, many are the plans in a man's heart. It acknowledges that we have a lot of intentions and plans and schemes in life. And like we've said previously yesterday, the things that we tend to idolize aren't by nature bad things. They're actually good things and gifts from God. So we may intend to be the best Sparky we could ever be. We might intend to be the best husband we could ever be. We might intend, at least in my case, to be a really, really good public speaker. Right? We have these intentions and these plans, and they're not necessarily bad things. But when we make that the ultimate thing and the goal of our life, and if we're not satisfied unless we can do that, we've got ourselves a problem. So many of the plans in a man's heart. The thing to hone in, I think, is that it's in a man's heart. When something's in your heart, it's deep. Right? It's not just something that you're just like, oh, do you want to go get pizza? Yeah, well, okay, let's go get pizza. These are actually deeply ingrained. And so the question you really need to be asking yourself is, what are the things that you actually most desire to come about in your life? For me, I really want to be married by now. I wanted to be a young dad, had a kid on the way. I wanted to be in ministry already for church. I wanted to not be working this year. I had a lot of plans and a lot of intentions, and they're all good things. But God kind of directed it in other ways, in which comes the second part of the proverb, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. So we have this real deep idea that when something's in our heart, that's the thing we set our hopes on. But the reality is, just because it's there doesn't mean it's actually going to come about. And part of the damage of idolatry is that when we try to control something and bring something about by our own power and exertion, that's the word, it's actually quite painful when we don't pull it off. One of the things that God's been teaching me, at least in the last 2 months or so, is that I really need to start asking Him what it is that He wills for my life. And reflecting on the life of Jesus, I think that becomes even more readily apparent, because so many times Jesus draws away from the crowd by Himself with God and prays to Him, and then as soon as He finished and He meets back up with the disciples, He makes a decision. So a good example is in Mark chapter 2, where it talks about Jesus having just healed a whole bunch of people in this town and city. He's been up all day, been preaching, he's been healing, and then he's moved away, and he goes and hides himself really early in the morning and prays, comes back to the disciples and goes, guys, we've got to go. We can't stay here. We need to go elsewhere because the word of God needs to be spread. So after inquiring on the Lord for several hours, I imagine, he was actually prompted that the will of God was this. Now, the context there I think is important because he just spent a whole day successfully preaching, successfully healing an entire town. So he had the goods, he had their attention. He could have stayed there for a long amount of time and probably did a lot of good stuff there. But perhaps in his heart he thought maybe that's a good option. But God said otherwise. So intentions, not necessarily bad things, but when we put them up on a pedestal as the thing that we need to achieve, then we get ourselves into a lot of problems. Some things to be wary, though, of is it's not just the big things, but it's the little things as well that we try to control. So like I said, we've got this kind of microcosm where we try to control everything within it. So some examples and perhaps some behaviours that this might be an example for you is that when you swear, you're actually exerting your control on the situation. So usually when things go wrong, you swear, and it's a way of you handling and taking ownership and control of what's going on. It's the same reason why you get angry, and this is a big one for guys, and they're really simple things too. If you're at home and you knock over a stack of books and everything goes everywhere, you get angry. Why? Because you can't actually control the thing that's there. So kind of at the heart of what we need to understand is that whilst we have these good aspirations and things that we want to achieve, if they're the things that are going to complete us, then we're going to be very disillusioned and disheartened because there are things outside of our control. So we have this idea that we're kind of a combination of three different things in life: genetics, environment, and our choices. Now I'll explain all three of those. Genetics, right? You as a human being didn't really have any control over what you look like, what your natural physical or intellectual skills are. They were given to you by your parents and given to you by God. You couldn't control those. Environment. I was born in Campbelltown Hospital. Pretty sure that if I got given the option and the choice to be born somewhere, it wouldn't have been Campbelltown Hospital, right? But I didn't have a choice. And so my circumstance in the southwest Sydney area, my circumstance and the opportunities that brings, I don't actually have control over. And the third thing is choice, which really strikes at the heart of control, is the thing that I do have control over. But note that your genetics and also your environment are going to influence the amount and the breadth and the extent of your choices. So there are some people who, in America, can choose to become a computer programmer and then make a company called Apple and then create an idol for millions and millions of people, right? But if you go over to Africa, there isn't a choice. Like, for example, retirement in our society is a ridiculous idea. It's only really come onto the scene for the last 4 or 5 decades. The word doesn't even have any meaning in Africa. You work or you die. You could be 90 and hacking with a hacking cough because you're dying with pneumonia or whatever it is, and you have to work, otherwise you will die. They don't have choice in that regard. And just as an aside, then that's actually where you start to realise how you live rather than what you do as you live is more important than the things that you become or do, if that makes sense. So it's the mentality and the motivation you have as you do them that are more important than the things you actually do. So for example, the guy in Africa whose only opportunity and hope is to till some soil to hopefully get some food for his family can be more holy and more important, not more important, more holy and a better example of Jesus than you as a successful CEO of a business in Sydney somewhere. Why? Because it's the attitude and with which he did it. We have been given an extreme blessing in the fact that we have choices. And to be honest with you, genetics and environment aside, we probably have the best chance of doing anything we ever wanted to do. We could set our hearts on something and likely get it. And so the danger for us, particularly with the idol of control, is that there are less opportunities, strictly speaking, for that idol to fail us. We can set our hearts on something and very well go and get it. We can control what degree we do. We can make the choices in life that will get us somewhere that we intend to go because we have opportunity, and where we don't have the means, we usually have the money to pull it off. Because not everyone's heaps smart, but there are some people who go through med degrees because they just pay heaps of money and it takes them twice as long, but they get there. So there's this idea that we in the West, at least, don't realise how little control we actually have. Good example, there's a poet called Henley. That's his last name, not his first name. If it was his first name, I'd be nervous. Who wrote this famous poem called Invictus, which you may have heard of. And one of the sections of it, I'm not sure if it's the whole one or just a part of it, it basically just says, doesn't matter how straight the gate or how charged the scroll is with punishments, but I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. You've heard of that bit before, right? His point basically was that I control my life. Now, some background, he was British, so that tells you something about control, but he also broke his leg and had to get amputated when he was much younger, so in his late teens, and so he became a literary critic and poet, and he got quite famous for that. And there was a commentator who made a point on him and just said, you know, he thinks he's in control, but if he didn't actually have the IQ and the intelligence, if he wasn't in Britain at the time where he had the opportunity to step into that role, he wouldn't have been able to get there. So it really is twisted and wrong to think that you have control over your life, to the point where it's prideful, and it really does speak more of yourself than God. To the point where he's an exception to the rule, I think. So let's look at some examples. I've got some here for you. Now they're going to change for different people, and then I'll tell you some of mine as well. So let's look at some general examples. The Pharisees in the Bible, legalism, right? Moralism. They thought they could control their world by living a certain way. So they enacted choices and put certain boundaries on their own lives to live in a way that they thought was pleasing to God, and by doing so they'd control his favour. Some other examples, cleanliness of our house I've already mentioned. There are some people, and it's not just women, who demand that things are a certain way, that are positioned in a certain way, that are put back in a certain way. It may be that you need to control the TV remote. Sometimes we control things with our skills. We're really good at this, and therefore that's our area of control, so we know everything about it. And so because we know everything about it, we've seen everything, then nothing can surprise us. Therefore, that little voice in the back of our head that says you actually don't have the goods doesn't come back. All right? It might be our performance. That's a big one for me. I think I can control a lot of things by maintaining a really good performance in the things that I do and doing well at things. And largely God has tried to unseat that over many different things and places and times to show me that even that doesn't really bring about the lack of anxiety that I'm seeking. Some other kind of more obvious examples I mentioned: swearing, alcoholism, smoking. I've got a lot of mates at work who smoke just at work. They don't do it outside of work. Why? Because there's so much stress there that they're overwhelmed, and smoking calms them down. So Tom mentioned yesterday about sex, and for comfort, it also can be used for control as well. So there's this idea that if you can control sex, then you're okay. There's no anxiety, there's no fear, you can actually make it in the world. So some things to look out for then with control. Remember, if we're talking about plans and intentions, then things like being inflexible when plans change. You're an idealist, which means that you're thinking about the way things could be perfect. These are all things that kind of indicate that control could be a problem for you. Excessive planning, looking to the future, making decisions in your life and in the lives of others, thinking that you know the best way to do things, asserting control over the big and the small things, right? So not just your career and your family, but how things are arranged in the house. Dad is a really big control freak, which means that there are certain ways that you have to do things. The house always has to be locked when you leave. There are piles of books everywhere and you can't move the books. They have to be in that pile even though it's all heaps messy and stuff like that. And that's just the reality of how he tries to control his world. Sadly, I've inherited almost everything that he has. And so house has to be locked when we go out. My room cannot be touched even if it looks cleaner, because then I won't know where things are. I mean, like, I'm really governed by this idol. Like, there's a stack load of paper in my room that my intention is to scan it in and electronically file it, so I'll have space in my room and everything will be ordered and clean and in control. And it just cuts me up every time. It's been on my floor for 2 years. I just haven't found the time or the discipline to sit down and do it. And so even my intentions, however small they are, don't actually convince me that I can make it in this world. I feel decidedly out of control. And I am somebody who has lots of intentions and lots of goals and dreams. And often I feel very far from them. And so therefore I think then that I've somehow failed, that there's this weight of worthlessness and fear and anxiety that kind of comes upon me because I haven't been able to exert my control on things. Drama with that is that I'm living in denial. I'm not actually thinking about who actually has control in the world. And I very rarely pray to God for that peace that transcends all understanding when I'm anxious. To my detriment, I would say. There really is this mentality that the grass is always greener. Maybe something to think about and remember, in that if I control this area of my life, if I somehow get to this stage in my life, then things will be okay. The reality is that no matter where you go, no matter how successful or how controlling you are, you'll always be disillusioned, always be empty, always be unsatisfied, because you honestly and sincerely don't actually have control. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. So, 2 things to think about to overcome this idol. Remember, we talked about you can't remove it. Nature abhors a vacuum. Something will fill its place. We need to replace it with Jesus, and there are 2 ways to do that. Or 2 things to think about. 2 P's to remember, which is kind of handy. First is perspective. You actually need to understand and accept that you aren't in control. You really don't control anything. Even your choices are kind of marred by your own sinfulness, and the things that you intend to do, you never actually do. You are decidedly out of control. The perspective, though, is that God is in control. And the sooner you get on board with that idea and actually commit to that idea and trust that idea, you'll actually find that there's peace, there's less of a need to control, because you understand that God is in power. So Psalm 33, verses 10 and 11, I'll read that out for you, just to kind of make the point come home. I've got to find it though, that's the only problem. The Lord foils the plans of the nations, he thwarts the purposes of the people. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. So it's sort of a depressing point perspective, because you need to realise that you are small and finite, and in the grand scheme of things, not worth much, if I can put it that way. We presume that we are the centre of our own universe, just like Henley did in his poem. But what we fail to realise is that there are many plans in our hearts. It's actually God's purpose and his plan that actually prevails. As Christians, and in the same kind of pattern that Jesus sets up for as we watch him in the Gospels, is that we need to actually conform our will to his and pray to him and inquire of him, what is it that you want? What is it that you intend for my life? Because I can guarantee you can talk to a whole bunch of people who are 50 or 60 and you can ask them what they intended to do when they were your age, and they'll probably tell you that actually God had very different ideas for me and I ended up in a very different place. If they're godly, they'll also be able to tell you that it was actually for their good and for the good of the kingdom and the spread of the word. To the point where you can look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and see him going, I don't want to die, Dad, I just don't want to do it. But your will, not mine. Why? Because I'm not the one that's in control of this world. You are. Why? Because you actually have an intention that is far greater for me and for those around me than the ones that I'm thinking of right now. I'm thinking selfishly. You're thinking on a global scale for your glory and for the good of the people who call on your name. Perspective. And then provision, which kind of segues neatly into it. Because God's plan for you is actually better than your plan for you. Something I'm beginning to realise in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I have these wonderful and large and lofty aspirations, and I'm just beginning to realise that maybe if I get those things and I control those things, my life will actually have that same emptiness. The grass isn't actually greener, but God's plan for me, whatever that is, will actually be better and will be for my good and for the good of those around me. And I can vouch for that. There are times when I've just gotten the sense that God wants me to do something or move with something or risk something or put myself on the line, put myself in a situation that I can't control, and usually it's amazing. I get a gospel opportunity or something like that. Like I was on the train 3 weeks ago and hopped on, and I was, I'd left work early, I was feeling zonked. So I hopped on this train, this girl comes running in after me and just goes, hey, is this train going to Campbelltown? I'm like, yeah, it's going to Campbelltown. So she sits on, pull through Parramatta, which is the wrong direction, wrong line. I look out the window, I'm like, oh, crap. I can't even control getting on the right train, right? These choices are horrible. And so I turned to this girl, like, oh, I'm really sorry, but I've gotten the train wrong. We need to get off. So we got off at Westmead, I think it was. I ended up just chatting to her. She goes to Inspire Church just down the road. And she's currently separated from her husband, and she was at a point where she was ready to just leave. He'd already expressed desires for divorce, and she'd kind of given up. And I actually got to talk to her about it and encourage her to do what 1 Corinthians 7 did and actually stick at it, because divorce is a hefty and weighty thing that you don't want to jump into quickly. And, like, completely out of control situation. I was late to somewhere. I don't know what was going on, but God used me in that situation. And He taught me a lot about how to counsel people, because it's very easy to just say, you shouldn't walk out on them, you should love them. What a stupid thing to presume you can tell somebody to do. So I actually got to listen and learnt to hear where she was coming from, understand what her needs were and where she was going and that sort of thing. And I got to quite subtly and through the power of God encourage her in the way that she should go according to what He told us in the Bible. I don't claim responsibility for that. God did that, because he took me and put me in a plan that He had rather than a plan that I had. My plan usually involves get on the train as quick as you can, get to the car as quick as you can, go home as quick as you can, and put on the TV. Kind of senseless, really, when you think about it. Our plans aren't that big. God's are bigger and better. He provides for us. So similar sort of thing with Romans 8, right? All things work for the good of those who love Him. Right? His intentions are never meant to harm us. And it may mean that we have to give up things like wanting to get married early, in my case. It might mean having to give up aspirations of certain jobs or skills or owning certain things. But the ultimate reality is that God provides. A sub-note on that is some people like to control things because they really are unsure of their safety and well-being. You see this a lot in women, but I don't want to just generalise like that. Guys will probably have it too. You get anxious about life circumstances. Will I have enough money to survive? Will this happen? Will that happen? I'm just petrified that my kids will get run over by a car. I don't have control. And the way to kind of overcome that is to remember that God does provide for you. And we read about that in Matthew 6. It's just, don't worry about what you eat, what you drink, what you're going to wear. I've got you covered. I've got you covered. I'm in control. And the sooner you realise that and acknowledge that and commit to that, you'll learn and you'll see that is the obvious way that God needs to be in the place of where you've put the idol of control. And look, I'm spent. That's the love of God on control. So, yeah. If we split up into prayer triplets again, we'll give you 25 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about power. Some people have left overnight, so if you're kind of displaced, just hang around here and we'll sort you out. Well, look, guys, that's control. I want to be satisfied in my life and with myself if I control a certain aspect or area of my life. I've kind of identified that's quite prevalent in all of us, and we've also identified that it's incredibly hard to transition the trust of that control from ourselves to God. The thing that's obvious, though, is that we aren't in control. We try to deny it and live in that denial, but it usually fails us, and it causes us a lot more grief. So the sooner we can transition and get some perspective and realise God's provision, the sooner we can actually start to replace that idol with what God is, who God is, and what He did for us. For the last talk, we're going to be talking about power. Power's a funny one in that I think it's the one that most people think they don't have, but I imagine it's the one that all of us have and we just don't realise it. When we talk about power, we want to think about people, because power is inherently relational. Where control is exerting your authority and control and that sort of stuff over things, over your life, the things that you do, the things around you, power is the exertion of your will over the people around you. Now, you're probably thinking right now, dictators have the power idols, and you're completely right, they do, but I would say that everybody does, because we are inherently relational beings. So when we think about power, we need to be thinking about when we try to exert our dominance or our influence or our will or our desires on other people to coerce them or prompt them or force them to act or think in a certain way. So like I just said before, it's not just positions of leadership, although if you have the power idol and you're in those positions of leadership, things tend to be more damaging. The thing to remember with power is that usually we will exert it in our own sphere of influence. So what it is and who it is that we have power over, that's where you'll see that idol come out to play. So for example, you're not going to try and exert your power idol over the Prime Minister when you meet her, unless of course that idol is so completely developed, and we'll talk about that a bit later, that you cease to think in terms of reality. But usually, for us, thinking of a few of you guys are leaders of ministries, and so you are put in a position of power and authority over those in your care in that ministry. Some of you have families, which means you have power and authority over your wives, over your children. Others will have friends and friend groups, your girlfriends maybe, and you will inevitably push power and use power for your own selfish reasons rather than for the benefit of the other people that have been put in your power. And that's really kind of the two options you've got when you are put in a position of power or authority over somebody. You can either serve them for their good, or you can get them to serve you for your good. As an aside, before we look at the life of Saul, who got this wrong, examples of the play for power are everywhere. So we can look at them in the workplace. So your boss or your co-workers will make plays of power to get one up on people. They'll make decisions, they'll make things difficult for certain people. They won't do things, they'll get you to do things and then say, I didn't want that, or that's not good enough, and send it back. You've got stuff in the home, marriage, parents, children. All these are relationships that can be tarnished when somebody is selfish and uses the authority that they have over these people to bring about certain things. So we've got cases of domestic abuse, of child neglect, of children rebelling against their parents. You've got peer circles, bullying at school. I know I got fairly bullied at school. I imagine some of you have been as well. I imagine some of you were bullies perhaps. There's all these positions and plays for power. Political, we're talking big scale now, so the oppression of people. I'm thinking of some dictators in Africa. I'm even thinking of Australian politics and how so many people get into politics because they want the power and the influence over people, because they think that they will somehow get that voice out of their head, like we were talking about before, that you are powerless, that you don't actually have control over the things in your life or the people around you. And so they try to deafen that voice out by making plays for power. And unfortunately we see it religiously too. We see it in ministries in general, in ministers and ministry leaders, how they use that authority to get their own way. But we also see it too, particularly in the Catholic Church with the child sex abuse, and how we see them in positions of great authority and power, abusing and misusing them for the sake of their own selfish gain. So when we think power, we think relational, and we also think, are you using it for selfish or selfless motivations? Who knows who Saul is? King Saul. It's a fair few of us. Most of you should have heard of him. He was the first king of Israel, and he was prior to King David, who always gets the kudos because he was the man after God's own heart. He is the counterpoint to Saul's life, because Saul was anything but a man after God's own heart. And so what I want to do is I want to track through his life for our benefit and see how the idol of power came to the fore in his life, and how it got progressively worse until it reached a point where it was incredibly damaging and really hard to believe that it ever got to that point. What I want us to see is that it'll give us an insight into where dictators come from, perhaps, and how we're not really above that either. So we're going to be, instead of like the last talk looking at one verse in Proverbs, we're going to be looking across probably 10 chapters, 12, 15 chapters of 1 Samuel. I've taken snippets and we'll see how we go. Now, we first learn about Saul in 1 Samuel 9. It says this: he had a son, that's his father, named Saul, an impressive young man without equal among the Israelites, a head taller than any of the others. So already we have this idea that he is physically a force to be reckoned with. He's a massive dude. All right. Interestingly though, when Samuel, the prophet at the time, comes to Saul and anoints him as king over Israel, a little conversation takes place. It's later on in chapter 9, and it says this: and to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and all your father's family? Said Samuel. Saul answered, but am I not a Benjamite, from the smallest tribe of Israel, and is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing? Now this conversation has just precipitated after Saul has been wandering around the wilderness for 3 days trying to find his lost donkeys. right? So he's the firstborn son of this family, and usually they've got some pretty good responsibilities, looking after the land, looking after the stuff. And his dad loses some donkeys, and so he says, Saul, my firstborn son, go find the donkeys. You can take a servant with you, but just go wander and find them for me. Thanks, buddy. So Saul's kind of wandering around with this one servant in turn, and there's even a point where he suggests to the servant what they should do, but he's not entirely sure, but then he kind of makes up his mind afterwards with the servant's encouragement, because the servant goes, whatever you want, we'll do it, right? But there's this idea that already Saul is a bit of an enigma in that he's massive. Like, he has every reason to think that he's a powerful dude, but from the discourse that goes on between him and Samuel, am I not a Benjamite, the smallest tribe, the smallest clan? I've just gone hunting for donkeys. I'm not very big. We learn a bit later on, when Samuel's talking to him after he's anointed him, he says this, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you in power, and you will prophesy with them, that is the prophets, and you will be changed into a different person. Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hands find to do, for God is with you. As Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart. So this is something that I want you guys to keep in the back of your mind as we track through Saul's life. Power is given to him by God. So power always comes from God, and it's always dispensed to people. And the use of that power, like I mentioned before, is either for the people it was meant to serve or for yourself. Saul's going to make that choice, and he's going to make the wrong choice. But it's important to remember that the power is actually given to him by God to begin with. He's low in his esteem. He doesn't think much of himself, both in societal position or personally as a man, despite the fact that he has reason to. And God gives him the power. Continues on. When they're selecting the king, and all Israel has been called to an assembly, it says this, the king is chosen from among the tribes, this is 1 Samuel 10, but when Saul is called, he's found hiding amongst the baggage, right? Yes, he's hidden himself among the baggage, is the phrase. So they basically cast lots, they go through all the tribes, through all the clan families, to the one family, to Saul's family, to Saul, and then everyone's just like, where is he? And the dude's hiding with the bags, right? He's this massive dude. You can just imagine he's kind of, you know, those tall guys where he's gangly and you try to put him in a small space, and it's just pretty funny because his legs and arms are sticking out everywhere, and it's just never meant to be. You can just imagine him sitting in there, and then some servants finding him and pulling him out. And all of us are just looking at this guy who is massive, but clearly small in his own eyes. And to kind of cement that point even further, after he was anointed, Saul also went to his home in Gibeah, accompanied by valiant men whose hearts God had touched. This is i.e. that he announced as king. God moved certain people to commit to him and serve him. But some troublemakers said, how can this fellow save us? So they've already seen to the heart of Saul that he is actually an underconfident and essentially weak person, despite his size. They despised him and brought him no gifts, but Saul kept silent. So normally, if you're a king, if you have a proper understanding of authority and position, you don't do that to the king and get away unscathed. I imagine if Saul had been a king for any time longer, or you get any other kings in Israel where they understood kingship, Israel was still new to the whole idea, they would have been executed or severely punished for that sort of treasonous and treacherous thoughts. But Saul kept silent. Why? My suspicion is because he didn't think that they were wrong. He was quite clear in his own mind that he was not much. He was insecure. He was underconfident, small in his own eyes. Essentially what he'd kind of tapped in on is this feeling that we all have of powerlessness and dependence. Once again, it stems from that no man's land thing. We've actually rebelled against God, which means we've tried to take it on our own, and just like a massive school assignment that you think you can do in one night and you can't, you come to realise that you don't have the goods and you can't pull it off. Saul was very, very keenly aware of that, to the point where it's probably unhealthy. It's not just an acknowledgement of that. We as Christians have the confidence to actually acknowledge that before God and come away unburned. But when you don't have that support, it can lead to a world of pain and depression and darkness. And Saul was in this position. We do learn, though, as his life goes on, that he starts to feel comfortable in the power that he's given, which isn't a bad thing. You expect this. He's new to it all. He doesn't have much confidence. Now, previously Samuel had told him that when he goes to a certain place to wage some war, wait for me. Wait for me 7 days. I'll come and I'll offer the sacrifices as the priest, as the prophet of Israel. Then we'll go to war and kick some butt. So he's arrived at the place, and this is 1 Samuel 13 from verse 8. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished, Samuel arrived. What have you done? When I saw that the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, Now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favour. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. A few things wrong with this incident. He gives 3 reasons as to why he jumped the gun and didn't trust Samuel, nor did he obey God's command to wait for Samuel. The 3 reasons were: 1, the men were scattering; 2, Samuel didn't turn up at the set time; and 3, the Philistines were assembling, and I thought they will come down against me at Gilgal, and I haven't sought the Lord's favour, therefore they'll defeat me. Alright, so there's 3 things going on. So in other words, he's packing it. He feels out of control. He doesn't feel like he has power of the situation, of the people that are going on around him, and that sort of stuff. And so he tries to take control, and we're going to see a bit of a mix of idols in Saul, because already we've seen approval. He wants the approval of people. Now he wants control of the situation, and particularly control of the people, because the people are running away and they're scattering, right? And he looks at it and goes, I need men to fight the Philistines and beat them, and if I don't have the men, then I can't beat them, and therefore I'm stuffed. In contrast, David will come along a bit later and kill Goliath with a sling and a stone, on the premise that he has defied the very living God of creation, and that you don't come away unscathed. And so I, a small boy, can come up against the largest man I have ever seen and will probably ever see, and kill him easily. Why? Because God's on my side. I don't need men. Saul was decidedly earthly in his thinking. And so he sins, he disobeys God, he doesn't wait, he takes on a priestly office that wasn't his. Interestingly, he was going to do the burnt and the fellowship offerings. The only one he got to do was the burnt offering, which is for sin. The fellowship offering, which is kind of for peace and fellowship with God, didn't actually ever get offered. There's a bit of an unnerving thing. The issue there was that Saul didn't obey God, and that he kind of looked to his own power to try to control things. The second thing that he does, second major bit of disobedience, and we kind of start to see power really starting to come to the fore, and he's lost the plot. It's not about him. Sorry, it's not about God, it's about him at that point, is when he's ordered to attack the Amalekites. So he's told, now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. But Saul and the army spared Agag, that is the king, and the best of everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. So already in his mind, once again earthly thinking, they took the best, they destroyed everything that wasn't worth having, in contrast to God's command, which was to destroy everything. Don't care how good it is, destroy it. And then he disappears. So Samuel kind of rocks up on the scene after Saul's been there, and he finds out that Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honour and gone on down to Gilgal. So already God has given him power. He is completely underconfident, insecure, weak, fearful, anxious, and he starts to use the power that he's been given to supply for his own deficiencies. So he's trying to salve the emptiness that he feels inside. He's trying to use that power that God has given him for the good of his people and for the glory of God, and he's trying to use that for himself. By doing basically that, he's commanding people to do this, that and the other, and there's a point at which he makes stupid commands and rash decisions too, like he orders that no one's allowed to eat until he has avenged himself on his enemies. So he's already stopped using the language of God, and you may have noticed that too. Now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal. He has set up an honor in his a monument in his own honor. The language changes, and he starts to use personal pronouns rather than the enemies of God, like David frequently does. And so what we see with the idol of power is that if you cling to it long enough, that selfishness that first governed it turns in on itself, and everything becomes about you. Now, one of the things we'll note is what happens when you commit to the idol of power. Samuel rocks up and he says this to Saul: although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, go and completely destroy these wicked people, the Amalekites. Make war on them until you have wiped them out. Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? And then a bit later, for rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of God, he has rejected you as king. That's pretty heavy words. In other words, Saul, you've got it wrong. The power is from me. It was from me for you to use for others, not for yourself, and to kind of cover up your own insecurities. And Saul doesn't get it. His reply is simply this: I have sinned. Now just remember, just because you can acknowledge you're bad doesn't mean that you've repented of that. I have sinned, but please honour me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. It's not about God anymore at this point. It's entirely and completely about Saul. He doesn't want to lose face in front of his people, even though God's just said, nah, gone. You're not the king anymore. And so what he does is he asks Samuel to make a show so that he doesn't seem weak and insecure and useless, the very thing that he's afraid of and the very thing that he feels at the depth of his heart. What's he trying to do? He's trying to exert his power over Samuel and then over the people to kind of convince himself that he is somehow worth it, that he can somehow make it in the world. Saul's reaction is essentially to continue to play for power. Now, the interesting thing about power is that you need to keep seeking it, otherwise your weakness will be exposed. You need to continually be seen by other people to be in a position of power, in ease, of confidence, whatever it is. Otherwise, they'll see you for who you are. And when you're exposed, you can't handle that because that's the thing you've been running from for so long. And so you need to keep playing for power and keep pushing for power and try to maintain your power. So Saul's freaking out at this point because he's just lost it. God has taken it away. So that's something to remember. The power that you have isn't really yours. It can go like that. It's the same with control. You can be driving in a car. You don't know whether you're going to get killed by a bus or not. You don't know. It can be taken like that. Why? Because you're out of control. Why? Because you are powerless in your own existence. And we'll read in 1 Samuel 16 that the Spirit of God leaves Saul. So the thing that marked him as the anointed king disappears. The next verse, it comes upon David in power. And so we have this transition, a changing of the guard. Where Saul was once king by the anointing of the Holy Spirit and the power that he had, David becomes it, and it's at that point that Saul becomes horrendously lost and hopeless. He becomes rash, angry, anxious, fearful, absolutely jealous, paranoid that people are trying to get him, to the point where they sang a song about David, and Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They have credited David with tens of thousands of kills, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Saul has a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David and had left Saul. At that point, he is so far gone that he can only trust in himself and his own abilities. He tries to kill the guy, can't take him out. And so he becomes incredibly paranoid and jealous that his position that he has, even though he's officially lost it before God, will be completely gone physically in this world. Which means that when you receive a position of power, whether it's as a husband, as a ministry leader, as a friend, if you're fearful of losing that position, perhaps the thing you need to think about is whether the idol of power has actually started to govern your life. Are you paranoid, anxious? Do you think that people are thinking about you or saying things about you behind your back? Because the thing that happened to Saul is that all of a sudden he begins to think that everything is about him. And when he starts to think like that, he becomes paranoid, and it's very clear that his power idol has kind of mutated and grown into something quite fearsome. That kind of fear and paranoia is going to mark the rest of Saul's reign as he chases David down, most of his life trying to kill the guy. He grows increasingly angry, and it's at this point in the book of 1 Samuel that he's never described without having a spear in his hand. Really, really interesting symbolism. He's taken something up in his own hand, spear, a weapon of war. That's how he's going to maintain his power and authority. Interestingly, a little bit later on, David sneaks into his camp and steals the spear. It's a thought, and I'll elaborate that a bit more. But I suppose the thing to think about is that when we start to get fearful and anxious and jealous, it's because our idol is threatened. The thing that drives us and gives us security and stops that voice in the back of our head from talking loudly is going to disappear, and so we clutch for more of it. So we see this incident, and I'll keep labouring the point, where Saul is chasing David and he rocks up at the temple, and there's a priest there who has helped David, unbeknownst to him that Saul's actually trying to capture him. And he talks to all the guys around him after having discovered that David's been there and left and escaped. And he says this, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you are concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today. The center of Saul's world is now himself. Me, my. He doesn't even use names. It's all about him at that point. He's completely insecure. The world has become about him to the point where he will justify any action to get and crave and maintain the power he's got. So the next thing that happens is he puts to death 80 of God's priests because David escaped, because they'd all conspired against him. And that's something that's really scary and not something that's beyond any of us. The idol of power gets to a point where you can start justifying things because it's all about you and not God. And so all of a sudden right things become wrong things and wrong things become right things. What we end up with is dictators who kill their people for the sake of their own power because they're insecure, they're afraid of being exposed as weak, they're fearful, jealous, angry, and the world is about them. God, however, smashes the reality home to Saul twice, because twice David has the opportunity to kill Saul. First in the cave and then afterwards when he sneaks into his camp and steals the spear. He has two near-death experiences that God uses to illustrate to Saul that he is actually powerless. In both instances he acknowledges his sin, he realizes the reality, but he refuses to repent and let go of that idol of power. Instead he tries to maintain it and pushes it. He refuses to let go of his idol until the very last point of his life, where he's at battle. God has promised that he and his sons are going to die that day. They get overwhelmed. Saul gets shot up by arrows. And what does he do in the last moment of his life? He tries to exert power. He turns to his armor bearer and he says, "Kill me, because I don't want these guys killing me. You need to kill me." And the irony is that he's got his armor bearer so terrified and his subject so terrified that the armor bearer doesn't do it. He refuses to. So Saul, in a last act of desperation, in a last act to exert the power over his own life that he thinks he has, kills himself. He dies alone and in denial about his position in creation, without God, at the end of God's justice and judgment to him. That's where it ends up, the idol of power. There's a bit of irony in that power alienates you. The very thing that you want, which is worth and value, security, encouragement that you can make it in the world, power is the very thing that takes all that away from you and actually makes that gap wider and wider. The more you exert and manipulate people, and exert your power over people, the more you actually push people away and there's meaningful relationships and the things that actually do give you some value and sense of peace further and further away, and they only end up in a world of pain. The reality, though, is that God is supreme in power, and we see this all throughout the New Testament and throughout the Old Testament, where God deals with people and shows them that He is the one that is in power, He is the one that is in control. And I think we need to remember that when we are dealing with relationships. It's the thing that will unlock that idol. If we let Jesus take up that place, the same Jesus who God gave power to, the same Jesus who gave that power up, when he resurrected, came back, ascended to the throne, was given everything. If we follow his example, then we'll understand that power is fleeting and only ever was God's to begin with. It can be taken away at any time. It can be given at any time to anyone. So, identifying power idols. We need to look relationally. If we don't look relationally, we won't find them. We've already talked about a few key ones. Paranoia, thinking that everything is about you. A really, really good example is Man Camp, actually. 2 weeks ago we found out that we couldn't do it at the farm that we normally do it. So in the last 2 weeks I've been quite pushed to realise that 1, I'm not in control, and 2, that I'm powerless. I couldn't control the fact that we couldn't get a new venue. And so an example is that I let the ministry staff know, and they went and tried to find me another farm. My instant reaction to that was, hang on a minute, that's my choice. We're not finding another farm, we're changing the date. And so there's a whole big kerfuffle of things, and like I was talking to Ben about it, and Michael Neat and a few others, about what do we do, what are we trying to figure out. I'm getting really annoyed that these people have gone and made this decision without me. Are they trying to undermine me? What's going on? Like, I thought I was in control of what was happening with this ministry. And so the caution I have to give to myself is that as soon as you start getting paranoid and you think that people's reactions and decisions are directly related to you, you have a problem. Now, I kind of grew up without many meaningful relationships. I was bullied throughout high school. And so I think this steady transition, like it did with Saul, happened with me too, in that it's not so much about the approval of people anymore, it's about the influence over people that become important. And you've got to be really wary of that transition, particularly as you are given positions of power by God, that they don't turn into that. So relational, where is it that you exert your will, where you want to get your own way? Because it's that petty. It doesn't have to be big, you don't have to be the President of the United States or even the leader of a church or a leader of a small group or anything like that. Remember, you'll exert your power in your sphere of influence. Where is it that you want to get your own way and you do things to get it? Use the stupid trivial example. Is it basically just to get the TV channel that you want? It's pointless, but those power plays are going to happen all over the place. What about when people say something that isn't funny? And so you basically just go, yeah, nah. It's an exertion of power. You're trying to prop yourself up and put somebody else down and basically kind of validate your own existence by making sure that you have power over someone else. Some other examples, particularly at work, this one, when you deny requests when it's in your power to deny them, or you particularly frustrate people when they want you to do something, you take extra time, or you do it slowly, or you don't do it properly. I have to deal with a lot of people at work who are like that. One guy, I asked whether I could move a table, and he said no. I'm like, come on, man, it's a table. He's like, no, you guys. And it was in his power to say no, and there was no reason to, but he just is on a power trip. He needs to be able to have power over people because he's an incredibly insecure man. So other examples, giving people minimal instructions, expecting people to know what to do, and then grilling them alive when they don't do it. All these little things are power plays. You'll see it between boyfriends and girlfriends. You'll see it between husbands and wives, amongst mates. People will just do things and say things to try and exert power and maintain control over the people that are around them. Usually it's making choices on behalf of others, judging other people, manipulation. The ways that we can kind of find this idol are look to emotions as well. When do we get really, really angry? Are we super anxious? Are we underconfident? Are we paranoid? Because this is going to give you indications that power idol might be an issue for you. Some other qualities, and look, if you have some of these, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have this idol, but it's something to think about nonetheless. Self-absorbed, you're manipulative, you're intimidating, you're persuasive, dishonest, deceptive. People fear you. You can't be questioned. You're not open to advice. You have unrealistic expectations of yourself and others. You're unpredictable. You're insecure, cowardly, paranoid. At the heart of all, selfishness and pride. There's a lot there. And I think we'll leave it at that. Like I said, power comes from God. It has always been God's when you're given it. And you have a choice to use it either for yourself, because of your own insecurities, or you can let Jesus cover those insecurities and you can use it for the sake of others. Remember Solomon when he asked for wisdom. The reason that he asked for wisdom, and nobody ever remembers this, they always say he asked for wisdom and then he forgot everything else. The reason he asked for wisdom is so that he could actually rule God's people well. He said blunt-faced to God, I can't do this, God. I actually need the wisdom so I can actually rule your people well. That's what pleased God. The fact that he was selfless and actually wanted to do the thing that God had charged him to do. And because of that, God blessed him. Not just because wisdom is special, but the reason for what he wanted it for. So look, what I'll do, I'll open it up for questions, and then we'll disappear for another 20 minutes by ourselves to think and to pray about the whole of the weekend, where it is that we need to repent. The whole point of this weekend has been to identify idols, not necessarily remove them in one fell swoop. That's the Christian life. It's not going to be an overnight thing, it's not going to be a year thing, it's going to be the rest of your life thing. You'll remove one and realise there's another, and remove that, and then realise the one that you thought you removed is back again, but just in a different form. We are sinful creatures, which means we will always put God second to something else, if not third or fourth. The challenge and the mission for us as Christian men is to bravely seek those idols out, face them with the power of God's grace. Yeah, and that's that. So, questions? Anything for any of the week, I'm quite happy to answer, or the last two talks in particular.
Yeah, I got a question, and an example of like do you think that having someone with the power of, do you think that's more like step up into a position of power. Because I know, especially in an apprenticeship, you get the minimal instructions and you get slammed if you don't read it properly, or if you do something not exactly right, or even if the boss just wants to exert his power over you. And especially when you're qualified and that all the rest of the tradesmen are like, well, welcome to the group, now you have power over apprentices and stuff.
Yeah.
That can be very much a transfer thing, and all of a sudden you slip into the power. Obviously I'm not there yet. I don't actually know that that's the case. I'm just speculating. But do you think that's possible? And do you think it's more likely to be with power than
With anything
other
else?
things?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be more likely with power than anything else.
Yeah.
It's particularly powerful because it's relational. And we learn relationally from people. And like I was talking to Joe and John Green about this last night, about how the way that fathers treat their sons kind of transfers to them in terms of their understanding of life and how they navigate life. And so one of the big issues for me is control and self-worth, because that's one of the big issues for my dad. So a lot of his behavioural patterns have been transferred to me, and the ones that haven't, the root cause is still there and they manifest in other ways. My encouragement to you, other than a brief aside, in that sometimes they give you minimal instructions to teach you to think for yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Is that, yeah, you're completely right, and yeah, it likely is going to transfer. So the challenge for you then, Ding, at least in that particular workplace, is to be different from all the other tradies when you're fully qualified. Because the probies, the apprentices will notice that and value you for that. Because you will put them in the deep end, but you'll put them in there for the right reasons, and you won't electrocute their shoes and attach them to welding things in the floor. You can't do that anymore because of H&S, but there's tons of stuff they used to get up to. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard stories.
Well, I worked with Trev Turner, who was the groundsman at William Carey, and he said that when he was an apprentice, this guy would come and poo in his lunchbox every day.
Wow.
And he just kind of looked back and laughed and went, it was just his way. And I'm just going, no, it's not.
Yeah.
You know?
Our TAFE teacher said that one of his apprentices, one of the guys he taught at TAFE, was strapped to a fence and had a fire hose stuck in his mouth.
Yeah.
It clears you out very quickly.
Yeah.
Good.
No, it's not.
One of the things that you got to remember as well is that those tradesmen that are in position of power are also in that position of responsibility. There's someone above them that's going to quiz them as to why that isn't done. So, as someone
I know,
because I've made the transition and I know where you're coming from, and I'm still within the last few years able to look back and go, is he being unreasonable? And then I've got someone underneath me who I know can do a particular task, and that's when you're going to get the frustrated tradesman.
You got to get.
Yeah.
They got to learn.
I've given you a task, you couldn't do particular other tasks, and the frustration builds up, and then someone's on
especially if it's
on
happening
their case.
again at the same sort of thing.
So,
And that's been one of my difficulties too with ministry, is I've gotten into positions of higher authority over people. So I'm not sure how to use it. So I'm always still very anxious about asking people to do things, because I'm fearful that I'm coming across as bossy or whatever, and that's got to be motivated by a need for approval more than anything else. So I still haven't found the easy confidence, like I was saying before, to just say, you know what, this needs to be done, can you do this, thanks. Or being very specific with instructions, I need 30 of these cut in this specific way, remember to do this, thanks, and just disappear without having to say, thanks for that, man, you're heaps great and special, and yeah. Any other questions?
How do you, someone that's has a control mentality, I guess that isn't letting them even consider changes in opinion. So, how do you kind of reach that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
So if I bring something up and they don't even consider it because it's different to theirs, and they know that it might change their opinion, but they can't deal with that
Yep, and that's actually a really good marker of people who like power. They refuse to change their opinion or position on a particular issue, even when obvious reasons to do so pop up. Because to them it's an exposure of weakness, whereas to others it's actually a mark of strength and sense. Yeah. To which point you really just need to bear up under them. And which is why there's so much in the New Testament about slaves needing to honour their masters, even if their masters are cruel idiots. Like, for example, I have a great boss at work, but he has some very prominent flaws which I think frustrate the whole of our group within research and development. I was talking to one of the other guys who I work with, who's probably similar to our boss's age, who's been in industry for 30 years, and I just said to him, look, this is a real issue with our boss. And he's like, yeah. And it's like, I really just want to kind of just tell him, hey, have you thought about doing this? And he just looked at me and he goes, Matt, you're a first-year engineer. That's not your position or place. So there is a real sense in which sometimes you can't, and sometimes the best you can do, and it should be your first point of call anyway, regardless whether you can tell them or not, is to pray for them, be patient with them, serve well under them, be submissive, as much as that sounds stupid, because it's just like, oh, I'm encouraging their behaviour. I think one of the benefits of Christian community is that, generally speaking, and that's not always the case sadly, there are Christian leaders who are open to that. Like, I fully expect every single person in this circle, if they've got a problem with me or something that they need addressed or want to bring my attention to because I'm blind to it, because we're all blind to our own faults, that you would come and tell me. Because I see that as a thing of love, and I would like to know and have the opportunity to grow. My thought is that we should all be cultivating that attitude, because the fear in Christian community, and I think particularly in our church as well, is we don't want to tick people off. We want to have that status quo. We want the approval. We don't want to upset the boat. So we don't actually talk to each other about each other's flaws. And if we did, it wouldn't be motivated in love. It would be motivated in that moralistic sense and need to control things, if you know what I mean. And so understanding the right motivations and trying to strive for them is actually going to help each other's health as Christians as well. So that's something else to think about.
What about in terms of peers, though, rather than the boss that won't consider anything?
Yeah.
If
What?
you're talking to one of your peers about something.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I'd like to get some help from John or Michael, who've kind of been around a bit longer as well on that, because there is a sense in which there are some peers you can do that with, particularly if they're younger than you. Like, it's funny how physical age has the ability to do things like that. The thing that gets me, though, is you go read through the history books and you've got people like Charles Spurgeon, who was an amazing warrior of the faith, leading a pastor's school at 26, and he was having 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds coming in and learn from him. And you got to ask the question, they're peers in one sense, but who is this little upstart that they're actually putting themselves under the authority of? And I think there's the mark there. If you've got people who are willing to learn from you, then by all means, teach them. But you need to gauge whether they have actually been put themselves under your authority, relationally or officially, if you know what I mean. What are your thoughts?
It's very hard in terms of when there's peers and there's peers. So some people, your relationship will be different to them depending on what that peer relationship is. So school friends, workmates, a workmate might still have a position of authority over you, or just a bit of experience. And each situation is going to be a little bit different. Maybe chat later. And I think peers will respond differently. You need to know what the peer, how they're going to respond to. Well, you're not going to know how they respond every time, but sometimes you need to be able to read into them about where their heart is on that issue anyway, or where their heart actually something that's going to change on this, or is it something that God's hardened their heart on, like He did with Pharaoh, and that it doesn't matter what you say, they're not going to change, and it's going to be something of God that will change them, and not what you're going to say to them. Because saying was pretty convincing, and all those signs that God showed to Moses, through Moses to Pharaoh, were pretty convincing. But Pharaoh's heart was still hard. And you kind of look at that and you say, well, why wouldn't you realize that you should have let him out a long time ago before all that pain? And I think people are going to be a bit like that. It's only actually God stepping in and changing someone's heart would change them from being that controlled person to even being able to think about something changing. And there's a point at which you've got to say, I can't do it.
Yeah.
Do controlling and
Powerfuling.
are they related?
They are. I found them really, really difficult to separate, because in both cases they're an exertion of will over something, aren't
Yeah.
they? And so, where one I kind of categorise in my own mind as your own life and your own world, the other is decidedly relational. And I'm happy to sit on that, but it was very confusing trying to prepare these talks, because they are very similar in that regard.
Yeah.
But they're both also extremely different too when they start to manifest to their extremes.
Yeah. Would you deal with them differently?
You would and you wouldn't, in the sense that they're usually with control, it's letting go of circumstance and of plans and things that you kind of see and experience. But with power, I think it's understanding that it's related to people. And the thing that I've kind of learnt in the last two or 3 years, particularly through Fight Night, but just with church ministry in general, is that people are frustrating and confusing, and they don't do what you want them to do. They're just like, they're wild cards, you know what I mean? Because we're our own people and we live our own lives. Both of the issues, though, are addressed by a focusing and a commitment to God's sovereignty. And so, where with control you're committing to His will for your life and His control over your life, perhaps with power you're committing to His sovereignty and His control and power over other people's lives. Maybe I could put it that way. There certainly is an element of, if, like Ding said, you're not in a position where you can influence other people, then you certainly need to pray for them, because the one who is in a position to influence them is God, who is sovereign. You got to dig deep too, because some people may want control, because, well, I suppose it's always going to come down to the insecurity that came from original sin. And so realising, I think, first and foremost, that Jesus has you covered, that His grace is sufficient for you, is the starting place for anything. And it's the hardest thing, because you think you understand grace, and then something new pops up and you're completely flawed again, and you just get so frustrated and wound up, and you're more likely to ignore God than come back to the same place that you keep coming back to and acknowledge that, yeah, I can't do this by myself. And I still think that I can in my heart of hearts. And I can't change that. Like, the realization has to be that God has to change me. That I need to see Him for who He is, and see the gifts that He's given us for what they are. Yeah.